Good evening. So tonight we have Professor John Kerezy, who I almost introduced as an old friend of mine because he feels like an old friend, but really he's only been an acquaintance of mine for about a year and a half. But I've been lucky to work on some projects with him, and he's just wonderful. Professor Kerezy is a writer, a former public relations practitioner, and a professor at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, and he's been there for the past 23 years. He also writes stories and he posts about people and events in Northeast Ohio on his blog site, www.ioncleveland.com. That's EYE on Cleveland.com. He holds a bachelor's degree from Wabash College in history, a master's degree from Ohio State in journalism, and an master's degree from Kent State University. So John had a personal encounter with Jesse Owens, and that's what inspired him to research Jesse and ultimately write this book that he has written, and he will tell you about that tonight, and he'll give you the title. And it's just been a joy to spend the last 24 hours with John. He came in early and worked with our Turning Point group, and with the background that he has, he did a wonderful job with our TPUSA students last night too, talking about how to discern truth in the media. So tonight, I warmly welcome John Kerezy.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Diana. I am reverberating just a little bit. We okay now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Because the microphone's really for the online audience, much more so than for the group here tonight. Just a couple like ground rules as we get going tonight. You know, when you're a college professor, you always set up rules and things like that. First half of the talk through Jesse Owens' triumphs in Berlin in August 1936. I prefer you not raise hands or ask questions. When I get into the second part, which is really of great interest to a lot of people, because very few people know much about Owens' life after he came back from the Olympics, feel free to raise your hand. The microphone folks will come around and be glad to handle questions that way. But I want to get through the first part of the talk okay, and make sure that you kind of set the stage for what I think is really important, because the reason why Jesse Owens is so honored and so revered even today is in part of how he conducted himself after 1936. And that made him one of the most admired people in America for many years. And as you'll see later on, he became a symbol of everything that's good with America. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So let's try it. All right. When you're a professor, you do things like typology or categorizations. So when I looked at Owens' life, I broke it into 4 phases beyond his growing up. The first one was when he became a track sensation, which actually started when he was in middle school or junior high, and then proceeded to high school, where he helped his team to 2 straight state championships and something back then called the National Interscholastic Championship. And he was a sensation in track all the way up until May of 1935. And he went to the Big Ten track championships in Michigan and set 4 world records, 4 first places in one day. In fact, some people call it the greatest 45 minutes in all of sports, because that's about the amount of time it took for this to happen. So now he's a superstar. And he stays a superstar through to the Olympics in Berlin, when he goes to Nazi Germany. And again, he wins 4 gold medals. That phase ends pretty quickly, though, when he returns to the United States and he faces racism and discrimination, which was very powerful back then. And for a period of about 15 to 20 years, he basically goes into what I would describe as survivor mode. He filed for bankruptcy. He had a very difficult time getting by financially, married with 3 children. Then in about the last 20 to 25 years of his life, first the U.S. State Department and then other people around the world recognized what he truly was. He was a symbol of everything that was good and great about America. And he became a goodwill ambassador for the United States, and also a goodwill ambassador for the principles of the Olympic movement in general. And he was in all those capacities, and he was actually a vice president with the United States Olympic Committee when he died in April of 1980. So that's kind of his life in these 4 phases. And that's also the title of my book, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But before I forget, for those of you that are attending here in person, on the table there that you checked in, there's now a sign-in sheet. So if you want to be on a list to get information about the book later on, just fill that out. And then when the book becomes available, I'll have Kent State University Press contact you. Oops, wrong button. There we go. All right. Jesse Owens lived in Ohio for many years, but he was born in Alabama. His dad was a sharecropper, worked the fields. His grandparents were slaves. So that's just a bit about his life. His family and millions of other families that were black began to move out of places like Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi as part of a movement that became known as the Great Migration at the end of World War I. Owens' family came to Cleveland in 1922, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. You can see the schools that he attended. I talked about East Tech. About 20 years of his life, he lived in Cleveland, and he also lived in Columbus when he was a student then, and he also returned to Columbus later on in his life with his family and lived there for a couple of years. So that's a couple of pictures about sharecropping in the South. Owens was from a family of 12, and they lived in a place like that. No running water. Heat would be like a potbelly stove. The Jesse Owens Museum in Alabama has actually built a recreated sharecropper's cabin, and you can walk in it to see what it was like. And they know that it's basically to scale and authentic because Jesse Owens' brother actually narrates an audio tape talking about what it was like growing up. So the Great Migration occurred in a couple of waves. Owens was in the first wave that started in the 1920s, and you can see the arrows that show different places that they went. That first wave was primarily a south to north, where they settled in New England, in Michigan, in Illinois, in Ohio, and other places. The second wave, which happened during and after World War II, was to the West Coast, more than to the Midwest. So Owens was part of that first wave. And the way that it happened was repeated millions of times. Big family, the oldest or one of the oldest would move north and kind of scout the area. Okay. His older sister, Emily, came to Cleveland, found work, no problem, found a good environment, much better environment, much friendlier environment than what they were in Alabama. She wrote back home, and Dad and Mom decided to move. And the family came in a couple of waves, but by the time September of 1922 rolled around, Jesse Owens was enrolled as a student at a school in Cleveland. So we know, we can't find the exact date that they arrived, but we know about when they showed up. Okay. Back then, Cleveland, next to Boston, Massachusetts, was considered the most black-friendly cities in the United States of America. And there's a host of reasons why. Part of it was still development and economic opportunity. Part of it was that there was an absence of what I would call discrimination, an absence of laws. So blacks were accepted pretty much as equals in Cleveland at this point in time. It had such a good reputation that if you look it up, you discover that Jesse's middle name was Cleveland. Jesse Cleveland Owens. Lots of blacks would do that. They would name a child after where they were hoping maybe like their North Star would be some days. So Cleveland had a lot of problems, and in my book, I talk about that. But having said that, around the period after the end of World War I, early 1920s, both in Cleveland and in many, many cities in the North, treatment of blacks began to change. The Ku Klux Klan began. There was a movie that came out in 1915 called Birth of a Nation, and sadly, that movie depicted blacks very badly and depicted the whites of the KKK very positively. In fact, a new organization called the NAACP conducted a nationwide boycott of that movie. So just to kind of give you a little setting about the backdrop, but still much more favorable for blacks in a place like Cleveland than they were in Alabama. In my research for the book, I discovered that Alabama actually implemented something called convict labor laws. That if they rounded you off the street and found you guilty of the smallest crime, they could put you in jail, and then the county could rent you out to an employer, and you'd be like a convict employee. That's not slavery. That's awfully close. The Owens family did very well in Cleveland for about the first 7 or 8 years, and then 1929, 1930, the Great Depression set in. And there was an economic decline. Jesse's father had a hard time finding a job. One by one, his older siblings quit school and started to get work. And by the way, Jesse himself worked too. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it basically decreased the economic mobility for everybody, but especially blacks. People who own property would subdivide property, and a single home would become two homes. It would become four homes, and they would squeeze four black families into rental units, for example. So it was a very difficult, more challenging time in their second decade in Cleveland. As I mentioned, Owens' family was pretty poor. Owens worked at a grocery store, and he worked as a shoe shine person on East 93rd Street when he was growing up. Later, the family moved from East 93rd to East 100th Street. And incidentally, that house is still standing. And there's now a movement afoot in Cleveland to declare it a historic place and maybe turn it into a museum or something like that, which I think is pretty cool. This is a picture, if I'm not mistaken, of Jesse pumping gas. Am I right? Okay. There was a wealthy black entrepreneur named Alonzo Wright at the time. And he went to the president of what was known as the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, or Ohio Oil, and convinced that guy to give him a gasoline franchise. He was the first black to own a gasoline station in Ohio, and he prided himself on providing jobs for blacks. So I've actually interviewed a person for my book that, as a small kid, remembered going to this gas station and having Jesse Owens pump the gas for the family car. The man who transformed Jesse Owens' life was a teacher. His name was Charles Riley. And Riley was the coach at Fairmont Middle School. And he saw Owens run one day, and he said, "Son, we got to get you on the track team." But he was more than just a coach. He was almost like a second father figure to Owens. He taught him a lot about manners. He would have Owens over to his home with parents' consent. And I looked at the map, and for Charles Riley to do that, he would drive about 9 miles from his house in the western suburbs of Cleveland to Owens' home, pick Owens up, take Owens in his car back to the house, then drive Owens back home, and then back home himself. And back then, the average speed for a car was about 25 miles an hour. So that was a very arduous thing that he did. But he took Owens to his first track meet. He also, at one point, wanted to try to get Owens to adopt a more fluid running style, head straight ahead the entire time. Because Owens, like a lot of new track people, was doing this, like looking around as he was approaching the finish line. We actually took him to a racetrack back around 1927 and showed him winning horses and how they ran, and said, "You want to imitate the horses." And sure enough, that was what Owens did for the rest of his track. All right, so he's a star at junior high. He actually has an encounter with an Olympic, a U.S. Olympian named Charlie Paddock, who had a very positive influence on him. That he came and spoke at the school. When Owens goes to East Tech High School, the track coach, who's kind of a novice, realizes he's got a superstar here. So he actually recruits Riley to help out coach at the high school. So Riley continues to work with Owens as he matriculates in his high school years at East Tech. Along the way, a little funny side story, and I've got a gazillion of these, but this is one I put into the presentation. The 1932 U.S. Olympic sprint champion, 100 meters, was a man from Michigan named Eddie Tolan. Tolan qualified for the Olympic team at track tryouts in Chicago. Owens was very young at that point. He was only 18 years old, but they invited him to do a tryout. He was like a sophomore in high school, or a freshman in high school. He went, and Owens got to know Tolan, and Owens learned that Tolan had a little hamstring. Owens drew an assignment for an ideal lane for the race. Tolan had an outside lane assignment. Owens switched assignments with him to help Tolan succeed. He qualified, overcame his injury, won the gold medal at the Olympics. These two became friends for many, many years because of that situation. I share that just to kind of give you a feeling about the character of Owens. 1933, 1944, 1932, 33, East Tech High School is state champion. Anybody here heard of a high school a little bit north up the road called Dayton Dunbar High School? They were state champions in track for many, many years. The guy that is with Owens was on the track team with him. His name was David Albritton. And Albritton went on, was a state legislator here in Ohio. He also coached Dayton Dunbar for many years. So he was instrumental in helping make the success of that particular team. And that's their coach with them as well. By the way, if I didn't say this, unless it's specified up on the screen, the pictures came from the Cleveland Public Library or the Ohio State University archives, where they have a lot of archival information about Owens. If there's something underneath it, then it came from somewhere else. So this one came from the Cleveland Public Library archive. At that point in time, they had something called the NIS, or a National Interscholastic Championship, and it was held each year in Chicago. And his senior year, Owens went to that, and you can see what he did. He tied the U.S. record for 100 yards, and he also helped East Tech win a national championship. So like the crowning accomplishment of his high school career. There were, at one point, according to an article I read, 21 colleges around the country that were going after Jesse Owens to come to their college and be on their track team. Right? For a while, it looked like the one that was going to get him was that school up north, the University of, you know which one I'm talking about, that one, Michigan. Some prominent Ohio State alumni backers caught wind of that in Cleveland, and they didn't like that idea. They were back down in Columbus, and they kind of lobbied, and they kind of talked to the coach down there, and they basically told Owens, we'll get a job for your father or you if you come to Ohio State. All right. So that was the promise. In reality, Owens, who was hoping that his father would get a job in Michigan, never got a job either at Michigan or at Ohio State in Columbus. But Owens did get 2 jobs while he was a student at Ohio State. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that was part of the way he ended up becoming the Buckeye. So back then, freshmen were not eligible. So his freshman season was 1934. His track coach, who was a great guy, and they became best friends for a long time. I'll tell you a little bit about him later. Did innovative things with Owens. He would have him do exhibition meets. He had his team running to classical music. He was trying very hard to kind of get them more focused on where they were on the track meet himself. But it was obvious even his freshman year that Owens had a lot of superstar potential. His main job was at the State House. He ran the elevator. The white athlete ran the passenger elevator in the front of the State House. Owens ran the freight elevator in the back of the State House. The white athletes did it during the day. Owens had to work the night shift. Now, he made the most of that. He took his studies with him and did the best he could as a student. But that was the primary job that he held while a student at Ohio State. And he also later on got paid by the coach to go out and give talks about track, which was kind of interesting because he didn't have a car. So he always had to have somebody to give him a ride. So, come 1935, Owens is now competing. He's winning 2 meets, 3 meets every time he enters an event. His coach decides to put him in 4 events at the Big Ten Track and Field Championships, which were held in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And back then, they would call the Fridays the preliminaries or the trials, and then on Saturday, they would have the finals. So Owens went up there having a bad back. He'd actually had x-rays at the Ohio State University Hospital to see if there was something the matter. There wasn't. But that's a whole nother story. But he had a rub down. And by the way, fortunately, when the team got up there, they were able to stay at a hotel that allowed blacks and whites to stay together. And that was unusual. Many times when the Ohio State track team was on the road, the blacks had to stay at the YMCA, wherever that was. And many times they couldn't even eat in the same restaurant. That was how segregated things were, even in Columbus in the 1930s. All right. So he qualifies for all 4 in the preliminaries. And the way these are set up, they run within like 45 minutes of each other on Saturday. So what Owens does is the first one is the 100-yard race, they called it. And he won that, tied the world record. And the coach had agreed we're only going to go 1 event at a time. Come on, coach, let me do one more. Let me do one more. So the coach said, all right. So he runs the 200-yard, wins that at a new world record. Time for the long jump. And he'd been passing on the long jump. Anybody have been to a track meet? I mean, okay. As you know, if you're in a track meet and you do like field events and you do like sprint events, which he did, they will call your name. And if you can't show up because you're doing something else, you're allowed to pass. So you're allowed to defer up to like 3 times in this meet. So Owens and his team were deferring him until they finally said he's got to run. And his coach and he agreed, okay, we're going to take 1 effort at the broad jump. They called it back then. It was the long jump today. Owens set a new world record. He went nearly 26 feet. And that stayed the world record for more than 25 years. 1 try. 1 try. Well, you can guess where this goes, right? 1 event left. No way in the world I'm getting out of that one, right? It was 220 low hurdles, which they don't even run anymore. And he set that in a world record time. So the news all over the world is not Michigan edges out Ohio State for the championship of the Big Ten. The news around the world is that Owens sets 4 world record. And literally, because of the time, this is the beginning of AP, teletype wires, the whole 9 yards. This was front page in the sports section of papers all over the United States. How big of a deal was it? That same day in Pittsburgh, an athlete you may have heard of named Babe Ruth hit 3 home runs in a game. But Owens' story was higher in terms of the ranking. So everybody in the United States was beginning to understand that Jesse Owens was a genuine superstar. Owens went on to win 4 first places in the 1935 NCAA championships, which were held, believe it or not, in Berkeley, California, and 1936, which were held in Chicago, in these same events. Now, in 36, they were different events because they ran them at Olympic distances. So instead of 100 yards, it was 100 meters. Instead of 200 yards, it was 200 meters. But Owens finished first 4 times, twice. Never had been done before, never again, and I would dare say never going to be duplicated because the way things happen nowadays, it's not going to happen. So we go on to Berlin, 1936 Summer Olympics. Oh, man, what time is it? I got time. Boy, I hope I get it right. There was a field announcer at the Big Ten track championships. I think his name was Ed Cantor. And for whatever reason, at that field, Ford Field, they didn't have big speakers, a public address system. So he was using a megaphone down on the thing. So he was announcing the champions to come up on stage and be recognized in 3 times. And first place from Ohio State University, Jesse Owens. First place, Ohio State University, Jesse Owens. First place, Ohio State University, Jesse Owens. We get to the 228-yard low hurdles in the finals, and Owens wins again. And now he's announcing 3rd place, 2nd place. And then he says, Mr. Owens, come on up here. Kind of puts his arm around him and says, for the 4th time today, and with an eye toward next year's Olympics, representing the United States of America, Jesse Owens. Crowd goes wild. Because they had seen something they'd never seen before. All right. Never had seen any athlete and do anything close to what Owens had done that particular day. So what Canty did in the announcing was just kind of a presage of what was going to be happening with Owens. Okay. Germany, all of a sudden, they know who Jesse Owens is. All right. The German Olympic Committee, by the way, was putting out brochures and mailers and newsletters to countries all over the world about coming to Berlin for the 1936 Summer Olympics. So all of a sudden, Jesse Owens' picture and story is pretty prominent in the German propaganda, German mailings, because they realize this guy is the real deal. All right. So they list him as a favorite to win at least 1 gold medal. They don't know how many, but they figure he's going to be a favorite in the Olympics. Now, let me get to this character. Maybe character is too mild of a word, right? Hitler considered blacks to be subhuman. People who overheard comments that Hitler made from his booth during the Olympics heard many, many, many times derogatory words, hateful words that we don't have in our vocabulary anymore to describe Owens and other blacks, who, by the way, did extraordinarily well in track and field in the Olympics. Owens wasn't the only one by a long shot who won a lot of medals. There were many other gold medals. His friend Dave Alburton finished silver in the high jump, by the way. But Hitler was a racist. We didn't know how much of a racist he was at that point in time, but it wasn't too long after the Olympics were over that we began to see Roundup, and gypsies at this point were put in concentration camp when the 1936 Olympics had occurred in. So that's kind of the backdrop. And the thing that I've learned that's kind of fascinating, right, is there was a dichotomy here. Hitler might not like Jesse Owens, but the fans of Germany did. By the time the 3rd event came around, they were chanting, Jesse Owens, Jesse Owens, kind of like German broken English, every time he appeared on the track. The German Olympic Committee actually assigned guards for Owens when he went into town because he was just mobbed by people who wanted his autograph. German men would tap Owens on the shoulder and say, would you dance with my wife? He was a hero. And the German people knew it. And he was celebrated as such during the Olympic period. So he won the 100 meters, world record tied to 10.3 seconds all over the United States. And there were hundreds of reporters covering it. Big stories about Owens' accomplishments. Okay. Big news. The next day he wins again in the long jump. And he also develops a friendship with a guy named Lutz Long. And this is kind of fascinating because even to this day, nobody can say with 100% certainty what the whole story is. It seems to be that Owens embellished the story quite a bit, but here's the way it kind of came out as it was told. Different sets of rules in United States track and Olympic track. So Owens is warming up and kind of walking through the long jump pit, trying to check it all out. And the officials for the Olympic Committee raised the foul flag, claiming that this was an attempt. Coaches get upset and mad, but they didn't know about the rules. You're only allowed 3 attempts. Right? So he's lost one of his 3 tries. The next try, he goes over the takeoff line, clearly. And the foul flag comes up again. So now he's down to one more try. The distance isn't that long. He's jumped that distance for almost 8 or 9 years. The problem is if he doesn't, if he fouls or comes close to fouling and that flag goes up again, he's disqualified and he's out of the event. So supposedly, Lutz Long comes up to Owens and says, why don't you put a handkerchief just a few inches in front of the takeoff line and make that the spot where you actually take off? Because you're so good, you're not going to have any problem. And that's what he did. We do know from videos and pictures of the times that during what ensued to be a 2-person competition between Long and Owens, that they did talk to each other. Long at one point was in first place and set the world record. Owens surpassed him. I think it was 25 feet, 8 1/4 inches. So he then was the new world record holder, and Long couldn't beat that. So Owens became the champion, but he did one more run anyway because he was entitled to one more run. And he basically set a new world record. As soon as Owens gets out of the long jump pit, Lutz Long runs up to Owens and hugs him. And the two of them kind of jog very gently, side by side around the entire track. And the crowd is going wild. German crowd loves the great sportsmanship that Long exhibits. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because it's going to dovetail into some other stuff you're going to hear. All right. 3rd gold medal for Owens was a 200-meter race, and he finished first, 20.7 seconds. He defeated the guy who finished second, who was named Mac Robinson. Now, I didn't put any other competitors' names up there besides the German guy. Why would I mention Mac Robinson? And that's Robinson in the other picture. The finish, of course, is colorized. Mac Robinson was a pretty good track athlete. He was a pretty good athlete, period. He was at a junior college in there, and then he went to the University of Oregon and started at the University of Oregon. But you might know his brother a little bit better, Jackie Robinson, the first black to integrate Major League Baseball. So Jesse Owens was friends with Jackie's older brother. Now we get to the 4x100 meter relay, and we get to an unbelievable controversy. There was a preliminary event on Saturday for qualifying, and then there was a final event on the Sunday. And the American coaches bring in the whole the team. There were 8 guys who could have been eligible to do the 100-meter race. And they decide that they're not going to run 2 guys that were promised to run, named Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller. And they're going to replace them with Ralph Metcalf, who is black, and Jesse Owens, who is black. All right, what's going on here? If Hitler thinks blacks are subhumans, why would America put 2 of its 4 people on the relay team as blacks? Anybody want to guess? You know it. What? Stoller and Marty were Jews. And somehow the German Olympic Committee got the American Olympic Committee to agree to take them off. I have read various reports about it. Some of the reports say that Owens protested. He said, I got my gold medals. Let Sam and Marty run. And the coach was really lashed out at him, said, you will do as you're told. Different time, different attitude. Right? So Owens did as he was told. He ran the leadoff leg. The team won the 4x100, and I think it was 39.7 seconds. It was another Olympic record, which stood for, I think it was 24 years. All right. And by the way, one little nice thing out of it is Metcalf got a gold medal. Metcalf had never gotten a gold medal. He had finished second. He had finished third, but he got a gold medal. So that was one good thing out of this whole experience. By the way, I forgot to mention Snyder. Larry Snyder was the name of Owens' coach at Ohio State. And he treated Owens very well. In fact, they had some interesting commonalities, including dads of daughters. Snyder was a bit older, but they discovered a lot of commonalities that they had. So, big question, because it was all over at the time and it continues to this day. Did Adolf Hitler snub Jesse Owens? Because at the beginning of the Olympics, Hitler shook hands with all of the gold medal winners. But by the end of the first day, he didn't. He left. And when Owens won on the second day, and it was the second day, there was no Hitler to be found. All right. The head of the International Olympic Committee had scolded Hitler at the end of the first night and said, Herr Hitler, either you shake hands with every Olympic gold medal winner or you shake hands and meet none of them. Hitler decided to meet none of them. Officially, that is. Unofficially, he had little A's scurrying down to the field and they would tap somebody on the shoulder and say, would you like to come to the Führer's private box and meet the Führer? The woman from the United States who won the 100-meter dash and got the gold medal got to meet Adolf Hitler privately. So you could say, is that a snub? Well, here's the proof to the nth degree that it's a snub. In my research for my book, I ran across an article that was written in Germany about a year after the Olympics. And in that article, Lutz Long talked about getting the tap on the shoulder and got invited up to Hitler's private box where Hitler congratulated him for his excellent showing, finishing second to, he didn't say Jesse, he used a derogatory term. All right. Of course, he didn't know how close Jesse, by the way, those guys hung out. They were like inseparable in the Olympic Village after the long jump. They were best of friends, and there's stories about that too, which I'll get to. But that is for sure proof positive that Hitler snubbed Owens. Now, there's talk that they made a wave or saluted at each other, something like that during the beginning of the Olympics, but there's no proof of that. There is absolute proof that in this way, he certainly snubbed Owens. By the way, that's Owens' mother, and it is true that she was glued to the radio. They didn't have TV back then. One of the things that made this Olympics so fascinating is almost everything you see in the modern Olympiad in terms of media came out of Nazi Germany. They created a feed, and they fed the free to the entire world in 5 different languages, reporting about what was going on at the Olympics. They created a recording system where they could record what an athlete said and put it in a storage area and then play it back later on to somebody else. They also had very primitive television sets that were in different areas of Berlin, and it was extremely grainy, but you could actually see some of the televised images of what was going on at the Olympics. Anybody know what happens before the Olympics? Anybody seen something called the Olympic torch? What happens with the torch? Called a torch relay, and it starts in Greece. The very first torch relay was the 1936 Summer Olympics in Germany. Yeah, and I could go on and on about innovations that the Germans came up with to try to publicize and heighten the interest in the Olympics. And I have this in my book. The year before the Olympics, the Germans actually did a traveling exhibit. They had 3, what we now call like 18-wheel trucks going all over the country of Germany with exhibits talking about what the Olympics is going to be like and why it's good for the German people. Just to give you a small example. All right, the Olympics are over for the track team, that is. It ended at the end of the first week like it does today. And then the Olympics continued for another week. But like I teach my students in my Principles of Media Communications class, timeless truth number 1 is it's all about the Benjamins. The AAU and the United States Olympic Committee, back then they call it the American Olympic Committee, saw money-making opportunities. So what they did is they signed contracts with different national Olympic programs to have the American athletes basically run in exhibition meets. So they went to Czechoslovakia, they went to Germany, they went to Austria, they went to Sweden, they went to Great Britain. And Coach Snyder of Ohio State at one point made the comment that they were basically treating the athletes themselves like trained SEALs. They didn't give the athletes meal money. They didn't feed the athletes. Owens ran 3 meets in 3 different days after the 4x100 relay victory and found himself on the 3rd day in a cot at an airport near England, weighing about 15 pounds lighter than he did when he had started the Olympic process and without enough money to buy a meal. So I wanted to set the tone for what happens next. Oh, it's there. Okay, it's there. At the same time, in Germany, and then also at his hotel room in England, Owens is being beset by telegrams saying, hey, we'll pay you $10,000 if you do this for us. We'll pay you $25,000 if you do that for us. This is a kid who never made more than $1,000 a year in his entire life. So Coach Snyder confers with a couple of other coaches and with Jesse, and they basically say, you can't say no to these offers. This is like a transformational, life-changing thing for you. You really got to kind of say yes to these offers. So Owens runs at a track meet, an exhibition track meet in Great Britain called Clay City, and it turns out to be the last track meet of his life. And that's a picture of him there, colorized, getting the baton from Marty Glickman. And the U.S. won that relay, by the way. But there were tickets for him to fly on a plane to Sweden the next day and compete in an exhibition in Sweden. That night he turned it down. And he and Snyder booked a passage on the Queen Mary to come back to the United States. There were some heated arguments between the Olympic people and Owens. He said, look, I've had enough. I got a wife. I got a kid. I'm underweight. I don't have any money. By the way, Alonzo Wright did help him out. He wired $100 to Owens from Cleveland to England. It was an interesting side story there. But having said that, Snyder and Owens had talked about it, and Owens made the decision. I'm getting off this exhibition train, and I'm going to go back to the United States. He's on the Queen Mary coming back to the United States, and they get a telegram that Ferris, who was the head of the Amateur Athletic Union, and the guy who was in charge of the U.S. Olympic Committee, American Olympic Committee back there, named Avery Brundage, held a news conference in Berlin the last day of the Olympics there and announced that Owens was indefinitely suspended as an amateur athlete for failing to fulfill his contract obligation. Owens never signed a contract to compete in any of these exhibition meets. None of them did. But that's the story that they made up, and that was the story that some people in the media ran. But most of the media in the United States sided with Owens. He's an amateur. He just won 4 gold medals. He should be allowed to do whatever he wants to do. That's what America's all about, freedom, right? So that was what the majority of the people in the United States said at that time. But from mid-August onward, he could never run a competitive track meet again. The guy who won 4 gold medals for the United States was effectively banned. Didn't stop the honor. Owens was feted as the hero that he was. Huge parades in his honor in New York City, up the road in Columbus, and of course in his hometown of Cleveland in the days after he had arrived. Lavish gifts, keys to the city, the whole 9 yards. I mean, you name it, he was considered probably the most famous person in the world at that point in 1936. So how do we get to here? It is so sad, and it says so much about racism and discrimination in our country, that by December of 1936, Jesse Owens is running against a racehorse to make money. Now, forgive me if I need to explain something to you, because there are things that are in my book, and there were things that I didn't put into this PowerPoint that I learned since I made the PowerPoint that I want to share with you. Okay. Owens made a remark in late August of 1936 that, and he kind of said it half flippantly but half seriously. It wasn't Adolf Hitler that stunned me. It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yeah. Wu is right. President of the United States. Here is what he was referring to. Owens learned that multiple people who were influential in the president's circle had suggested to Roosevelt that he invite the whole Olympic team and Owens to a reception in their honor and do it at the White House. And FDR blew him off. Didn't do it. This became more common in the more recent era, John F. Kennedy invited Olympic athletes to the White House in the 1960s. And by the time we get to the late 60s, early 70s, we see more invites. In 1976, Gerald Ford invited the entire U.S. Olympic team to the White House for a ceremony, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And almost every president after that has invited the whole team. All right. But Owens was right when he said that FDR snubbed him. And the letters prove it, because you can see the letters going to the White House and nothing coming back. So, Christmas Day, 1936. Owens had signed a contract with the Cuban Athletic Commission to run in Cuba in Havana against Conrad Rodriguez, who was the number one sprinter in Cuba. Figures, okay, I'm not in the United States. I get away from the AAU. This can work out fine. The AAU caught wind of it, and they sent a telegram to Rodriguez, and they sent a telegram to the Cuban Athletic Commission and says, Owens is a banned athlete. If your guy Rodriguez runs against Owens, he'll be banned. You need to understand the depths of which the AAU was kind of persecuting Owens at this time. But Rodriguez backs out. The sponsors still want Owens to come to Cuba, so they offer a substitute, a horse named Julio McGraw. That's humiliating, right? That's terrible. Owens did this dozens of times over a period of 15 years just to put food on his family's table. The picture on the left was when he did it in California in the mid-1940s. Owens made a lot of money with endorsements and other things in 1936, but I'll get into the fact that it kind of evaporated. By 1939, Jesse Owens files for bankruptcy. 4 gold medal winners. Owens does try to do some things to make money. He creates his own basketball team and barnstorms, but he's not a businessman. The team ends up losing more money than it makes, but that's the Olympians. That's the basketball team. He does some other things like that. He gets some jobs, fairly low-paying jobs, gets fired from those jobs for various and sundry reasons. And like I said, he went into a dry cleaning business, and that business went kaput. And by 1939, he had filed for bankruptcy. At that time, he decided to try to go back to Ohio State and complete work on his academic degree. Great idea. The problem was he didn't have the foundations at East Tech High School, the academic foundations, to do well in college. And back then, they didn't have tutors or remedial education like we have today. Today, if Owens had come back, they would have had tutors and help to get him there. So he actually got put on academic probation 3 times at Ohio State in the late 1930s. He had his second child there, had a third child eventually. So he lived in Columbus for a couple of years, and he was an assistant coach, so to speak, on the track team as well, which was good because Snyder was still a coach. But having said that, the racism and discrimination was still hobbling him. And it did until World War II came along. World War II happens, and the bright people in Washington, D.C. say, there's a guy that beat Hitler once. Maybe we should use him. So Owens goes to Washington, D.C., and he's made fitness director for fitness programs to try to get the civilian population fit. Later on, I won't bore you with the details, but he has a former Olympic friend who was at Ford Motor Company in Human Resources, and that guy got active duty into the Navy. So he basically got Ford to recruit Owens, and Owens became an HR manager up near Detroit at the Willow Run factory, which was making bombers. And he worked there throughout the balance of World War II and did a very good job there and actually helped improve some bad situations that occurred up there during World War II. The interesting story. Oh, let me go back. Almost forgot. The guy over there is Lutz Long. Lutz Long, of course, is forced to join the German army, right? Fight for the Wehrmacht. And he is a paratrooper there. And he and Owens strike up a letter correspondence. And they keep in touch for several years. And around late 1942, Owens receives a letter from Long that basically says, I'm in a pretty hazardous situation. I don't know if I'm even going to make it out. And that was the last that Owens heard from Lutz Long. So after World War II, he stuck around in Detroit for a while, but eventually he moved to Chicago And the good people of the state of Illinois gave him a couple of jobs. He was the chair of the Illinois Athletic Commission, where their primary responsibility was to certify boxers for boxing matches, and they held a lot of boxing matches back then in Chicago. And then later on, he became the commissioner for the Illinois Youth Commission. So he received a nice award from Ebony Magazine. I mean, he received countless awards, but the one on the left is one he got from Ebony Magazine. Does anybody by chance know who the other black person is in that picture? Just curious. You may have heard of his name. Don't look back. Somebody might be gaining on you. One of his favorite sayings. Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige. That's Satchel Paige. Yeah. On the right-hand side, he's with Harrison Dillard, who was another Olympian from Cleveland. And that was a picture at a Big Ten track championship. Something happens around 1950, the Korean War, the Cold War. And the State Department realizes that the war is a war of ideas between the United States and the Soviet Union. And they also realize that they have got an ace in the hole that they can use to send to people around the world and talk about how great the American system is. Jesse Owens. So one of his first assignments is in 1951. The Soviet Union is having a youth festival in East Berlin. And they've invited like 70 countries to send young people. The State Department catches wind of that and they say, we've got to do something to counter that. So they got in touch with a guy named Abe Saperstein, who was the owner of a basketball team known as the Harlem Globetrotters. You may know some of this story. They asked him on fairly short notice, is there a chance that you could come to West Berlin and play a basketball game? And Saperstein said, yeah, we could do that. Then he said, what else do you think maybe we could add to the mix because we're trying to show the best of the United States? Saperstein said, well, you know, Jesse Owens has been with me from time to time in years past. He happens to be in Europe at the same time anyway. Maybe he'd come. And the State Department thinks, wow, why didn't we think of that? Right? Yeah, why didn't we think of that? Right? So the basketball game happens and it's a fairly small court, right, compared to this enormous arena. It's the exact same arena, Olympic Stadium, that the 1936 Olympics were in. The Allies had been very careful not to bomb that. So it was still pretty much in existence. So time for halftime. Halftime comes, the teams go to their locker rooms, and an Army helicopter comes in, circles the stadium, lands right in the middle of the stadium, and out of the helicopter comes Jesse Owens, dressed in the same tunic that he wore in the 1936 Olympics. You get the moment? The fans start cheering, chanting, Jesse Owens, Jesse Owens. Now, he's still in really good shape, but he's not trying to set any records. He just kind of gingerly goes around the track. There's a makeshift platform there. He gives a speech extolling the virtues of America and says, Germany, stand with us in freedom and stand with us as bulwarks against communism. Again, he says a lot more than that, but that's basically the thing of the speech. Here's the best part of it. Please pay attention in the back. I don't want you to lose me, okay? The mayor of Berlin is on the platform, and the mayor comes up to Jesse Owens and does this. Herr Owens, when you were here in 1936 and won your gold medals, Adolf Hitler refused to shake your hand. So today, on behalf of the German people, Herr Owens, I extend to you both hands. Both hands. That's what happened. The crowd goes berserk. People are crying. I'm crying just thinking about it. Why somebody hasn't talked about this before, I'll never know. Right? It's an unbelievably powerful moment. Powerful for Owens, the whole 9 yards. Incidentally, when he's done, he heads to the locker room, and a boy taps him on the shoulder and says, could I get your autograph, Mr. Owens? He looks at that boy, and that boy is the spitting image of Lutz Long. Owens picks up the kid's autograph books, and kids back then had an autograph book. And he had a picture of his father, Lutz Long, in the book. Owens pulls the kid aside and says, is that your dad? And the kid says, yes, it is, sir. He was killed during the war. Owens says, come over here, son. We need to talk. Yeah. And those two became correspondence friends for the rest of Jesse Owens' life. Oh, I almost forgot. 4 years after that, the State Department sent Owens to India. And he was doing training and he was doing clinics and things of that nature. You see the what rupee thing on his head? And he actually ran with and against the Indian Olympian. 20 years after Berlin, and he beat all of them. Phenomenal guy. By the way, this is the point. If you have questions, go ahead and raise your hands, so because we're well past the thing. We're basically moving past what I would call the survivor phase and into the symbol phase, right? Because Jesse Owens is a symbol. I see a question there.
I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but did he have any kids or get married or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Jesse Owens had 3 kids. The eldest of the 3 she just died like about a year and a half ago in her 90s. The other 2 are still alive. They're in their 80s. They live in an assisted living facility in Chicago. And again, Owens lived in Chicago from about 1950 to about 1972. So he raised child 2 and child 3 pretty much in Chicago. Child 1 was Gloria. And Gloria was born just after Owens finished his studies at East Tech High School. And there's a whole nother story about that, but that's the answer to your question. Another question here. Yes.
When was the last race that he completed?
Well, officially
Yes.
as an amateur, it would have been that White City exhibition in London about August the 13th, 14th of August 12th or there, about 1936. Now, having said that, he continued to run in like exhibition meets, not always against horses. Eventually, they started having him running people. He ran an event in Wisconsin in the early 1950s, and he was like about 1/10 of a second shy of his world record. 20 years after.
So when was the last one that he done recreationally?
I would guess the late 1950s. Okay, good question.
Yeah, thank you.
That might be worth looking up. Appreciate that. Any other questions right now?
We have an online question.
Sure.
Somebody asks, how are his records holding up today?
They've all been beat. Kind of fascinating, right? He had an indoor record at Ohio State that was just erased like about 4 years ago. I want you to think about that. That record lasted like 70 years, so 80 years, more than 80 years. But the 2 big ones were basically erased in the 1960s. The long jump record was the bigger one, and then the 10-3 and the 100-meter dash was erased.
I had a question.
Sure.
Last night when I was thinking about this, I looked up some videos of him like at the Olympics, and he said a few words, and I noticed in all the photos he always looks extremely happy and really self-confident with high self-esteem. And I was wondering, for someone who faced all this discrimination, has anyone ever written about that? Like, if he was how well he stood up, in the face of the racism.
Read my book next year. I talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it coming up in a minute too, because he helped me. We actually modified the slide so I could talk about that. All right, keep going. As I mentioned, he was with the Illinois Youth Commission. He actually formed his own company, like a promotional company, and he one year got hired by the New York Mets. Early 60s. He was their base running coach. And the Mets credited him with improving their base running because of some techniques that he taught. The other capacity where Owens was kind of revered and came into the symbol status was America's representative for the Olympics and all that was good about the Olympics. Dwight Eisenhower appointed Owens as personal ambassador to the 1956 Olympics, which were held in the fall in Melbourne, Australia. So he went and represented the United States there. You see some other pictures here. That young guy there is Muhammad Ali, known as Cassius Clay from 1960. And then you see some other pictures from different years as well. I actually saw in the OSU archives the letter from the Mexico Olympic Committee sent to Jesse Owens inviting him to come to Mexico City for the 1968 games. And we'll get there in just a minute. In the mid-1960s, Jesse Owens partnered with a guy named Greenspan. Alan Greenspan, yeah. And Greenspan became famous as a sports documentarian. And his very first sports documentary he did in conjunction with Owens. And its title was Jesse Owens Returns to Berlin. And what they did is they took the footage that he was talking about from 1936 and they interspersed it with pictures that the Army took of the helicopter landing and him doing that. And Owens went back to Berlin Stadium 30 years after the fact and basically retold the story. Became about a 45-minute long documentary. No network in the United States would accept it. This is 1966, and America's still a pretty racist nation. Some attitudes changed. There's a TV show that starts in the fall of 1966 named Star Trek, and it has a female black in an officer role on the bridge, Lieutenant Uhura. In 1967, we see more blacks being shown in TV. All right. Finally, a consortium of about 100 television stations around the country agrees to band together in syndication and show Jesse Owens Returns to Berlin. And the movie makes its debut on American television on April 2nd, 1968. Huge ratings success. The syndication made lots of money selling the ads for this. ABC picked up the rights to the movie, and they ran the movie itself as part of a run-up to the 1968 and the 1972 Olympics, and even beyond that. Great film, if you like historical stuff. If you just YouTube Jesse Owens Returns to Berlin, you'd find it. Owens joked at the time that maybe they should flip the negative so that Hitler would be black and Owens would be white. All right. So I hope that gets back to kind of what he had asked, right? But I just think it's a little fascinating thing in terms of they made a movie about the return to Berlin, and eventually that became a symbol of Jesse Owens as well. 1968 was a very, very trying year for our nation. It was a very, very trying year at the Olympics, and it was a personally very, very trying experience for Jesse Owens. Let me set the table for you. The president of the United States Olympic Committee in 1968, and soon to be the incoming chair of the International Olympic Committee, is named Avery Brundage. Remember that name? He had developed a nickname by then. Slavery Avery. You might remember that picture because it's one of the most famous pictures of the Olympics, right? The protest. Anybody know the names of those athletes? One of them came to Ohio and was a coach at Oberlin College. That's right. They were both from California. Smith, Tommy the Jet Smith was the other. Yeah, okay. So they finished first and third. And they do the Black Power salute. And Owens is there and Owens is watching it. And Owens knows Avery Brundage. Owens knows what's going to happen next. Owens pleads with the United States Olympic Committee, give me a couple of minutes alone with these guys. And he talks to them and he pleads with them, apologize. If you don't apologize, horrible things are going to happen to you. They refused. The Black Power protests, we're all for it. Within 5 minutes of Owens leaving the room, somebody comes in and says, the United States Olympic Committee has revoked your privileges. You're no longer on the team. We're sending you on the next plane back. Now, some people accuse Owens of being an Uncle Tom here. You understand what I mean by that term? Other blacks say, no, he was just looking out for these guys. You can think about it either way, but either way, Owens was prescient. He knew what was going to happen because he had lived through it himself. Yeah. So very, very trying times in our nation, very, very trying times for Jones and Tommy the Jet Smith, and very trying times for Jesse Owens. Oh, by the way, the guy on the left, there's some great stories written about him, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name right now. He's from Australia. Peter. He was ostracized in Australia for the rest of his life because he assisted these guys with the protest. He wore the Olympic Project for Human Rights badge and did some other things to help them. Some accounts, he actually found the gloves that they used. When he died poor and destitute, alcoholism, other problems. The other two guys flew to Australia and were pallbearers in his funeral. Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah, there's been a documentary and some books written about that. Little side story, and I know I'll get a little short. Yes, I got a question over here.
In light of the last Olympics with the Ukrainian guy and his protest, is that reflect from back then when protests were not, was that the start of protests not being accepted? And so it came forward now to the Olympics with the Ukrainian guy?
You know, for many Olympic cycles, the Olympic Committee has tried to keep politics out of the Olympics. Now, having said that, I am certainly not going to praise the International Olympics Committee for what they did to that athlete. There's a school of thought in my mind that there should have been no Russian athletes in that Olympics at all, because what Russia does violates the spirit and violates the canon and the principles of the Olympic movement. Right, that's just my personal opinion. In the Paralympics, they competed under the Russian flag. In the big Olympics, they were allowed to compete as individuals, but not under the flag. But still, everybody knew they were Russian. All right, let me continue here.
I had one more question.
Sure.
You had mentioned at the beginning that someone saw him running and suggested he join the track team.
Yes.
Do you know the context? Was he just like playing football with friends, or was he racing someone? Do you know what he was doing?
Kids play out in the alley by the school.
That's all it was, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's all it was. Yeah. Great question. All right. Back then and today too, the host country will give everybody who wins a gold medal some type of memento or souvenir from that country. So in 1936, Germany gave out English oak tree saplings, little saplings that grew. Owens won 4 gold medals. So easiest question of the night, how many saplings did he get? You win the prize, 4. Yeah. All right. What exactly happened to those saplings? We know some of them. We don't know some of them. All right. One of them was planted at his family's house, which he bought for them, by the way. And that house was destroyed and the tree was destroyed. The house. He said in Jesse Owens' returns to Berlin, almost 30 years after the fact, that one of them was planted at All-American Row at Ohio State University. Only one problem with that. All-American Row didn't exist in 1936, 1937, 1938. All right. Now, much to Ohio State's credit, they have assiduously looked everywhere, and they think that there was an oak tree that's now near the Thompson Library that might have been moved from some other place on the campus to that library. They believe that might be the oak, but they don't have DNA testing like they do for people, so they can't be 100% sure. But let me wrap this story with an interesting thing. I have a friend who is an arborist in Cleveland, and his name is John Palmer. And John collected oaks from the second one, the Jesse Owens tree that was planted at Rhodes High School. And as kids, we know what you can do with oaks, right? You can make them saplings, and they can become mighty trees on their own. John is a proud possessor of about 24 saplings, and now that some of them are small trees, that came from that Owens oak tree. One of them he donated to the Jesse Owens Museum in Alabama. It's like a prize thing of theirs. All right. So there is Mr. Owens at Rhodes High School in October of 1972. And I know that picture is true and accurate because I was at Rhodes High School then. Diana told the story. I was a pimply-faced 15-year-old, got invited to come to a special assembly, guest speaker, Jesse Owens, talking about the 1972 Olympics. I'm blown away by Mr. Owen. And like a lot of the other kids, I had the presence of mind to pull out from my 3-ring binder a piece of paper and hand it to him. And I got back, best of luck, Jesse Owens. And no, you can't have it. Oh, the 4th tree. We're not sure. We're not sure to this day even what happened to the 4th sapling. Then we move forward to the end of his life. He's in his early 60s, and he's invited to the White House. President Gerald Ford invites Owens to the White House because they're having a reception for the 1976 Olympic team. And Owens is told that there are going to be some other people there, but, we don't want you to speak. We just want you to be there. So Owens goes to Washington, D.C. with his wife, thinking that, this is a nice event. And President Ford surprises him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Biggest honor that a president can give, without the approval of Congress. Turns out that Ford played football at the University of Michigan when Owens was running track at Ohio State. Ford said he was in the crowd in Ann Arbor, Michigan the day that Owens set those 4 world records. They didn't know each other back then, but kind of an interesting connection. Yeah. And as I mentioned, he was on the U.S. Olympic Committee. He was raising money and trying to improve what they did. His family moved to Arizona. His wife and he moved to Arizona in the early 1970s because he had declining health. He had emphysema and some other things. Sadly, he was a multiple pack a day cigarette smoker for many decades. So Owens is diagnosed with cancer in late 1979. By the way, you might see these. American Express had a series of commercials back in the late 70s called "Do You Know Me?" And then they have some famous person who talked a little bit. The first black that they had in the "Do You Know Me" commercials was Jesse Owens. All right. But he contracted cancer and he only lived for about 4 months after that. One of his last pleas was to President Carter to let American athletes compete in the 1980 Moscow Olympics because President Carter had called for and implemented a boycott of the Olympics. So going back to your question, yeah. So he's buried in Chicago. Those 2 pictures on the right are the place where he's probably honored the most, no surprise, right? Columbus, Ohio. They have a stadium there named after him. The main entrance into the stadium entrance, if you go into the main entrance, it's called the Jesse Owens Atrium and Plaza, and they have a statue on the campus dedicated to him as well. The main place, if you want to find out information about Jesse Owens, is near his home in Alabama. It is called the Jesse Owens Museum. It's a wonderful place. I've been there a couple of times. They have a lot of memorabilia, which they have obtained from the Ohio State University archives and other places. They have movies. They have programs and special events there from time to time. So if you're ever going down that way, I would strongly encourage you to stop by. It's a bit off the beaten path, about a half an hour's drive from Huntsville, but it's pretty close to where he grew up. Cleveland, back to the beginning. Cleveland's done some things to honor Jesse Owens, in my opinion, not enough. There was a movement in Cleveland to name Cleveland Stadium after Jesse Owens, but it didn't happen. Some guy named Art Modell, blocked that. There is a statue to him as you approach Cleveland Stadium. They renamed a segment of Public Square Jesse Owens Way in Cleveland. They've done a couple of other things to honor him. And as I said, the house where he lived from about 15 to about 21 is on East 100th Street in Cleveland. And there's now a movement afoot to preserve that house and turn it into a museum, which I think would be a really good tribute to Owen. And bring him back to his roots here in Ohio and here in Cleveland, because most people, like on some reaction from the radio this morning, was, I didn't know he was from Ohio. Didn't know he lived in Ohio. By the way, the family's been very active. They're very active in the track and field movement. They created a Olympic Spirit Award, and the first Olympic Spirit Award was presented posthumously to Muhammad Ali in 2016. So, again, if you want to keep in touch with me, there's my contact information. As I mentioned, Kent State University has accepted my manuscript, which is called, I think I mentioned it, Jesse Owens, Sensation, Superstar, Survivor, Symbol, and that will be published by next spring. If you're interested, just put your name on that sheet of paper on your way out, and I'll turn it over to the folks at the Kent State Press, and then they'll put you on the list to receive information. I promise you they won't bug you with emails or text messages until the book is out. Any other questions?
Questions? Anyone?
I'm sorry, there are no online questions, so
Did you have a question, man? No, right here. I wasn't sure. You kind of had your hand. Oh, okay. Yes.
Just a moment, please. How many people in the family are grand?
Oh, great question. Yeah, go ahead.
What is family members left that are supporting?
Right. Jesse had 3 daughters and about 5 grandchildren, and I think there were like 2 or 3 great-grandchildren at the time. His wife, Ruth, lived for almost 25 years after he died. So she initially was very important. They set up something called the Jesse Owens Foundation, and did a lot of scholarships and a lot of philanthropic work in like the first 5, 6, 7 years after he passed away. Then the daughters began to take over that work, and they've been really good about it. but they're now in their 80s. And the two of them that are alive are in the Chicago area and doing okay. The third generation is kind of taking over. Did anybody here old enough to remember when the Olympics were last in Los Angeles? 1984. 1984 was when the Olympics were last in Los Angeles. And one of the people they recruited to be like in the chorus of 100 people that were going to chant the Olympic chant and all that was a woman named Gloria Owens Hemphill, who was Jesse's granddaughter. When they got there the day before, a couple of days before to rehearse, they pulled her out of the lineup. And they said, we have a different job for you. She carried the Olympic torch into the stadium. Yeah, they gave her that job. So the last person to have the torch before they handed it off to the person that sent up the cauldron was Jesse Owens' granddaughter. Right. Hey, by the way, before I forget, kudos and props to the people down in Alabama. It was a heck of a fight to get that museum established. And one of the things that they did is they got the Olympic Committee in 1996 when the Olympics were in Atlanta. They got them to agree to run the torch through the town. And the torch stopped at the site where the museum is. And they agreed, the only place ever where they agreed to let two people hold the torch, one black, one white, was in that spot in Alabama. That was really a thing for them in 1996. And the museum opened within about a year after that. Jesse's wife was there. Jesse's daughters were there. The whole family was there for it.
Michael, do you have a question?
I was just wondering if you knew anything about how he trained, because he looked like he had a muscular upper body, and I didn't know back then if they, track people would lift weights to train.
Back then, track people did not lift weights. He ran and he ran and he ran some more. Some of the techniques that Snyder did were quite common even in these days. These fartleks that they call them, or interval racing, speed day, slow day, speed day, slow day. They work more in technique than anything. Like Snyder worked with him on the best way to approach the finish line so that you hit the tape first. And steps, like how many steps you take on the runway before you jump for the leap or the long jump. So it was more of a, how can I say this, more of a strategy and the little footwork. Owens would tell people that Coach Riley taught him to run like he was running on hot coals. And when people watched him, especially in a sprint thing like a 100-meter dash, someone would swear that it looked like his feet never touched the ground because he was moving so fast. But there wasn't the strength training like there is today for modern athletes. And also, it wasn't a year-round thing like it is today. It was a seasonal thing that would happen from January to April. Hey, before I forget, I hope you don't mind, I want to dovetail on that question. I read some of the newspapers of Owens' middle school, junior high school, and he was an interesting character. He played basketball and he played baseball too. Now, it wasn't in every event, but there was one basketball game where they were beating the other team really, really badly. And Owens came out in the second half with his game jersey on in reverse, the number on the front instead. It kind of was a prank. And the newspaper story pointed that out. He played center field for the baseball team. He's a very good center fielder, very, very good defensive center fielder. And I'm sure he stole a lot of bases. But again, that was middle school. I was like junior high, so didn't know much about him. He did briefly try out for the football team, but the track coach said, no, I don't want to risk an injury. I want him to dedicate to the track. Any other questions?
Let's thank our great guests for coming all the way from Cleveland tonight. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Look forward to the book. Thank you.